All right, guys, welcome back to another Buckmasters Outdoor Podcast. We're super excited about this one, guys. This is with Aspen. She's from North Carolina. I'm not going to say the location because it starts with an M, I think, and I would booger it up, but I'll let her tell you that. I got a co-host, Alyssa Hall, as y'all know. Today, we're talking about a topic that is kind of touchy, a little sensitive in the outdoor industry. Red wolves, wolves. I mean, there's a difference. We'll get into this, and I'll let Aspen because she is the one that's more knowledgeable in this. But there's a difference in a wolf, red wolf, and a timber wolf, and a coyote. There's differences here. Okay, so we're going to get into this. We're going to talk about red wolves and their involvement with the ecosystem in North Carolina and in the United States as a whole and their existence, because they're not doing well if you don't know that. So that's something we just want to raise some awareness, just talk about it, to see us learn as buckmasters here, just learn a little bit about it as whitetail hunters and turkey hunters, and just see if something else about a creature that the good Lord made us. So we want to talk a little bit. Aspen, welcome to the show. We're super excited again. And again, I'm gonna put her Wildlife with Aspen as her Instagram handle. And again, I'll put some of her content, probably right now as I'm speaking. It's possums, black bear. I mean, she is covering alligators, everything, and she does a jam up job with some good photography and videography skills. So, Aspen, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited to talk about this. I really love talking with different communities, including the hunting community, and I think that kind of connection between sometimes canids are predators and the outdoor community, sometimes we're lacking that connection. So I'm really glad. I'm very excited that y'all asked me to kind of help bridge that today.
Yeah, yes, for sure.
That's such a great way to say that, 1000%. But thank you for making time to do it, because sometimes it can be uncomfortable to do that. So thank you very much.
Of course. Anytime.
So, Aspen, I guess a little bit about yourself, just about a little spill about who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, so I grew up in North Carolina pretty much my whole life. I got to study carnivores briefly in Tanzania. That's pretty much the only other time I've lived outside North Carolina. But I went to college at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, and I studied biology, and specifically I studied ecology. Even more specifically, I did statistical analysis research on gray wolves, which are the wolf species out west, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But then I also started doing more because I'm much more of a field biologist, and I don't like being in a lab. I like being outdoors. Obviously, we didn't have gray wolves. There's not even red wolves in Winston-Salem that far west. So I started learning I learned how to track coyotes pretty much by myself. I learned a little bit from hunters. So I kind of started early on being able to talk with hunters and work with them. So I studied coyotes a lot in college too. I did a lot of human carnivore coexistence work in the suburban area of Winston-Salem with coyotes, with foxes. And then after college, I was hired by a nonprofit called Wildlands Network to help research the red wolves out east. And I'm actually still working with them. Really cool stuff. Wildlands does a lot with road ecology, kind of interconnectivity between habitats, different studies like that. One of the projects that we've been working on is looking at the relationship between red wolves and bobwhite quail, and if red wolves can actually benefit bobwhite quail as opposed to maybe harming them, as some people might think. I can talk about that too. But yeah, I'm also a wildlife photographer and a wildlife guide out in Eastern North Carolina. So kind of a little jack of all trades with different canids.
Heck
yeah, I don't have myself, but I definitely kind of want to eventually probably get into at least turkey hunting, maybe whitetail hunting, as I kind of head on more east. But yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Good deal. I guess we'll just start this thing right out. I mean, we're here today to hear about the red wolf. I mean, a little bit again about the different canines and the.
I think that's the right place to start, so that the conversation starts off on the right foot.
So red wolf
is your knowledge behind the difference. And I don't even know the correct
Yeah, I'm so excited. Like, I'm pumped.
Me too.
I'll just I guess we'll just best way to do this is just let you do your spiel. So just what a red wolf is, where they're from, their existence, and all of that.
Sure. So I can do that real fast, and then after I briefly touch on the red wolves, I can kind of explain the different wolf species.
Please.
That's important. So I guess I'll talk about, actually I kind of start from there. So we'll kind of like go down more specific. So first of all, canids Canid is typically an animal that is in the genus Canis. That includes anything from jackals, which we don't have here, but jackals are in there. Our pet dogs, coyotes, wolves, every wolf species are in the genus Canis. The genetics in the genus Canis are a little funny because we typically, however we learn what a species is, typically what we have been taught is that a species is only a species if they can create fertile offspring. So if there is one animal from maybe quote unquote a different species, and you can they can mate and create a fertile offspring, that's the same species, but that's not actually how genetics works. And as we've learned more about genetics, we kind of discovered that's not really a great definition. So that's why every animal in the Canis genus, every species can technically produce fertile offspring, but they are still different species, as determined by like the most modern genetics that we have. But it can get a bit confusing.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that more because the whole hybridization with red wolves and coyotes is a very important, not understood topic. But let's talk about the wolf species real fast. So again, wolf species are still very highly kind of like, some of them are debated. Mostly it's the gray wolves now that are debated. One thing that is not up for debate, and I will kind of drive that point home, is that the red wolf is in fact a unique species. It is not a hybrid. It is not some weird super mutt. The red wolf is Canis rufus. So that is its unique species. The red wolf is native to the southeastern and parts of the Midwestern United States. They were here before European settlers kind of got here. They've been here forever. Now we have gray wolves out west. That's the kind of wolf that you more often associate with wolves, like the big fluffy Yellowstone wolves. They're much more famous. So those are gray wolves. Those are Canis lupus, and those are the ones that are more out west. Now there is a third wolf species. There is still sometimes considered a subspecies of gray wolf, but it's typically considered its own species. That's Canis liacon. That's the eastern wolf / timber wolf / Algonquin wolf. Those are the ones near the Great Lakes and kind of up there in eastern Canada.
A timber wolf, what I was saying, that's your gray wolf. I don't know. I've always heard of timber wolf. I don't know.
Is a colloquial term more. Timberwolf is not usually used scientifically just because it's just timberwolf usually refers to the Great Lakes or eastern wolf, Canis liacon. People use it all the time to talk about gray wolves, but it's not technically correct, but it's not that big of a deal. Coyotes, of course, a little coyotes that are running around everywhere. Those are a different species as well, but they're still a canid. But we're talking about Canis rufus, which is the red wolf, which is its own unique species. And I'll want to talk about there's controversy or confusion about the red wolf as a species, and I think it's important to kind of look at the facts on that.
Yeah, let's do that now. Yeah, the more education, the better.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So red wolves are a little smaller than gray wolves. They kind of run intermediary in size between coyotes and gray wolves. That again, a lot of people think that means that they are a hybrid between a gray wolf and a coyote, but that's not true. Actually, a really cool scientific article came out, and I can link y'all to that, but it showed that red wolves were on the continent way before gray wolves even crossed the Eurasian land bridge to get here. So that means physically they cannot be the gray
offspring of
they were already here. So coyotes and red wolves are more closely related. And if you look at like the phylogenetic tree, so like the genetic tree of how closely different species are related, they're more similarly or closely related. That doesn't mean they're the same thing. That's like saying, for example, like a lion is more closely related to a tiger than it is a mountain lion. So lions are actually more genetically related to leopards because they're in the same genus. They're not, but yeah, so they're different species though. So red wolves are their own unique species. And the confusion though comes because there can be issues with coyotes hybridizing with red wolves and red wolf country because there's so few red wolves. And when that happens, and if there is no availability to have some sort of management impact on them, they, in desperation, will sometimes pick a coyote mate. And obviously, we don't want that. The Endangered Species Act does not cover hybrids. Coyote hybridization is one of the leading threats to red wolf recovery. We don't want that. Right now, the red wolf wild population is managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they very actively, proactively avoid letting these hybridizations happen. And there actually hasn't been one in a couple of years.
How do they prevent that, Aspen?
Yeah, there's a couple ways they do that. So all of the red wolves, all the adults have bright orange tracking collars. And so these collars serve actually multiple purposes. One, it helps them be able to locate these animals for management actions, for health checks, just safety checks if something happens to them. All the new collars now have bright reflective tape, which helps reduce vehicle crashes. It basically acts like tape you use like on runners, or even like
construction workers.
Construction workers. Like it's that same similar.
It is, yeah.
So they'll show up much brighter on roads. But that also helps distinguish them from coyotes, because to an untrained eye, especially if you've never seen a red wolf, they can look pretty similar. So red wolves have that bright orange collar that tells hunters or anyone, this is a wolf, don't shoot it. And so they use that to be able to kind of monitor them and kind of take different management actions. And there are also the coyote sterilizations that happen in red wolf areas. So this is it's really cool, actually. So the program knows that kind of shooting every coyote, they say we're getting rid of them, euthanizing them, isn't really going to help, because there's more is going to come right down in the next year or two to fill in that territory. So what they've started doing are coyote sterilizations, where they'll target areas adjacent to known red wolf territories. They'll use foothold traps to trap the coyotes and actually sterilize them. And it's not the same thing as kind of like neutering or spaying your dog. It's slightly different, because they'll still retain those hormones. The hormones are what we want. They're territorial hormones. They'll try to mate with each other, but it won't happen.
So cool.
The coyotes will try to.
That's incredible.
And she had kind of mentioned this to me before we had talked, because I found that so intriguing. And you classified these types of coyotes as placeholders, which was really cool term. So like they're the placeholder, and us Southerners, we in redneck terms, they're the ones that dominate your couple hundred acres that you're hunting. They're the ones they're going to stay there. And if you do this situation, you're going to essentially, they can't breed, but they're the placeholder. They're the dominant dog or dominant coyote.
Yeah.
What do you want to say?
Breed.
That's interesting.
They can't breed. They will keep other coyotes out. And as long as that breeding pair, if both of those breeding pairs sterilize in that territory, they'll do a good job, unless either the red wolves will eventually run them out to new territories. And so actually coyotes in the red wolf recovery area are also collared, the ones that are sterilized. And the new ones are white, but there's some older collars that are out there that are black. So if you see a black or a white collared animal in red wolf recovery area, it's a coyote. It's a sterilized coyote. And it's actually to the benefit of landowners or hunters, if you see one of those, not to shoot them, because they're sterilized. They cannot breed. Might as well just leave that one alone. But yeah, so that also helps very heavily reduce hybridization. And so the strategy I also get this question a lot, like there's so few red wolves, what are you going to do about inbreeding? Like, how are they not going to inbreed with themselves? The wolves actually very much avoid inbreeding if they can. I got told a really, really fascinating story by one of the Fish and Wildlife folks that years ago, there was a pup fostered into a red wolf den. And if you don't know what cross-fostering is, it means it's another wolf pup of very similar age, usually only a couple weeks old, taken from captivity or another wild den. There's not enough red wolves for them to do that. But so they'll take a captive red wolf puppy the same age and just throw it in the den. And mom accepts it immediately. And what that does is, first of all, it boosts the numbers by 1. It also adds genetic diversity. But anyway, point being is, this was multiple years ago, but there was a female pup cross-fostered into this red wolf family. And like a couple years later, I believe the breeding female, the mom, died. And so they found that the next breeding season, the dad had mated with one of the pups. And they're like, oh no, this is bad. Obviously, this is bad. We don't want inbreeding. This is bad. But what they found is when they looked, they kind of, I think they caught her probably, or they found out which individual wolf that he had mated with the one female pup that was not biologically his.
Oh
So
my
somehow
God.
they knew.
That is interesting. Wow.
So they will avoid inbreeding when they can. But right now the strategy kind of is, so the red wolf pups that were born to the milltails, which are the most successful red wolf family out there, they were a really big deal. They were the first pups born since 2019. They were born in 2022. And 5 out of 6 of those pups survived, which is really cool.
Wow. Yeah.
But they are now reaching sexual maturity. And so I get this question all the time, like, how are they not going to inbreed with themselves? There's no other wolves around, which there's not. So the plan there will be to use animals from the SAFE program to release them into the wild with these now sexually mature wolves so that they'll have a fellow wolf mate. And the SAFE program is saving animals from extinction. It's essentially the captive breeding program. There's over 270 red wolves in that program. They're in locations all across the United States. They all work together. They're all managed as a single captive population. And they kind of strategically work together to boost genetic diversity, to make the best matches, to be able to look for the animals that can be released into the wild. It's a whole, like, it's kind of like matchmaking. It's like wolf Tinder. They kind of like pick their best for each other, which ones are going to have the greatest success. So usually the kind of the strategy, and is really cool too, is they'll grab, let's just use just a female wolf out there as an example. She's reached sexual maturity. There's no other mate around. They don't want her to breed with a coyote. So what they're going to do is they'll catch her in a soft padded foothold trap once she's established her own territory, and build a giant acclimation pen within her territory. It's a big pen. So put her in there, and what they'll do is introduce a suitable male from that SAFE program that they've deemed will potentially have the best success with her. They'll put them in, and then they'll kind of leave them in there during breeding season, which is late winter. And then hopefully they'll breed, and hopefully they'll have pups. And then at one point the strategy was to release them earlier on in the winter, but they've kind of determined that it's a better strategy now. They actually won't open that pen up until several weeks after the pups are born, because that helps the pair bond a lot more. So even if the pups don't survive, they're much more likely to stay together. Yeah. And so they do soft releases for these. They're called, it's a hard release, is like those dramatic, like Yellowstone wolves, like they're open the box and let them free. That's called hard release. Soft release is like those acclimation pens. They just open the gate one day, it's remote, and they leave whenever they want. That's a soft release. And they're still within that wild wolf's territory. And now they have hopefully a family group with them, hopefully a bonded pair. And then the animal that was in the SAFE program, the captive born wolf, will have essentially a mate that knows how to be more of a wild wolf than they will. So they'll have help kind of through that process. So that's the process for that.
I know you said there's 270 red wolves in the SAFE program, but when you look at numbers outside of that, what are we looking at?
And that the tie with that question though, for one, can you answer, what happened? Like why is the number down? But then how many is actually in wild, like actual outside and free?
So right now we're looking at approximately, these are the numbers I have right now. There are very likely more releases that they've done in late winter that hasn't been announced yet. This is just what I have. I don't work for Fish and Wildlife. Right now there's a known wild population of about 18 to 20.
And that's just in North Carolina, or
it's just in North Carolina, but that's the only wild population of red wolves. So
why? So why? What happened? Like, why are there so little?
So how did we get here? So back way up. So if you think about it, when European settlers kind of came over, red wolves were the first wolf species they actually encountered, not gray wolves, because they had to go west. Red wolves were the first ones. Obviously the East is much more developed than a lot of parts of the West. So long story short, kind of the same reasons why gray wolves and other predators were kind of just killed off. A lot of misinformation with how predators are beneficial to the ecosystem. A lot of the big bad wolf narrative. So historically, the red wolves were just killed off. They were considered vermin, pests. Just every single one you could grab, just get rid of them. Yeah. And so they heavily declined. And then by the 70s, biologists were like, oh my goodness, there's not a lot left. We need to do something about this right now. And also keep in mind, this is before the Yellowstone introduction program. This is when we were kind of figuring out, oh, predators are actually helpful. We do need them in a balanced ecosystem. We're messing up. We got to fix this. Yep. So the last red wolves were actually in a small pocket in very tip of southern Texas and Louisiana. So that is where the source population came. So in the 70s, biologists went out and trapped the last known, whatever wolves they could find, they grabbed them. And I believe they had to make sure that these were actually wolves, that these were not hybrids, that these were not coyotes. Right. I believe the starting population started out with 14 in the captive program. And the red wolf was actually declared extinct in the wild. And I believe, valid dates, I believe 1980 or around there, they were declared extinct in the wild.
Wow.
Most of it was overhunting. A lot of it was development, loss of habitat, but a lot of it also was just a lot of overhunting.
Yeah, because I see a lot of stuff, trail cam photos around in your area, not down here. It does trickle down into like Georgia, but I've seen people talking about, oh, that's a red wolf, but it's actually actually a coyote that looks like a red wolf. He's just marked up, It's interesting, yeah.
It is. Eastern coyotes.
Or could be. Yeah,
eastern coyotes are super fascinating. There's the potential that there's some red wolf admixture of DNA in some of these animals. Actually, they're doing studies on this really cool population of canids. They're called the Galveston canids, the ghost canids. May have heard of them from that same source area, Galveston area. They're really cool. They are eastern coyotes, but they have a tremendous amount of red wolf ancestry in their DNA. So there's studies being done. They are not considered part of the wild population. They're being studied because it's evidence that these red wolf genes have survived out there. That could be good for helping the species in the future. Mm-hmm. They're really fascinating animals. When people ask me, they're like, are those red wolves? I'm like, technically not. They're not part of the wild population, but they are fascinating animals that deserve to be studied, looked at, since that ancestry has persisted in their genes for this long. So this is also really relatively little known fact. The red wolf release predated the Yellowstone release of gray wolves. So the Yellowstone gray wolf release was actually kind of modeled off of the red wolf one. The red wolf one was the first of its kind to kind of introduce a large carnivore back into the landscape. I believe like programs like the California condor, black-footed ferret have also kind of been modeled off of this. It was really cool. It's a really big deal. So this was in the 80s. They released the first red wolves into the North Carolina recovery area, the same area we see today. They were released in Alligator River. And so actually, kind of over time, the red wolf population grew to a peak of, gosh, I gotta look. The peak was in, I believe, like 2011 or 2012. It was over 100 and, oh, geez, like, I'll find the exact number. I want to say like 150 wolves out in the wild. Then how did we get to 18 now between 2011 and 2024? Yeah. Like, or not, how do we get to 18? Like, what happened? So a couple of things happened. There was the species was called into question whether or not the red wolf is a unique species or if it's a hybrid. The Endangered Species Act does not protect hybrids. So if it was found that the red wolf was simply some sort of super mud or coyote mix, then the program would just be done. That would be the end of it. There was a lot of rift with coyote hunting out there. So at one point, coyote hunting was halted, especially at night, to protect red wolves. But what a lot of people saw was this infringing upon their right to shoot coyotes, which made them like the red wolves even less. So it's a whole thing. There's a huge increase in vehicle collisions, illegal gunshot because of this. More people got angrier at the red wolves. There's a lot more poaching. So that along with the program being halted to figure out once and for all if the red wolf is a unique species, they just catapulted down. And then for several years, there weren't even pups born in the wild, and back until 2022.
Now where exactly? I know you're saying North Carolina, but for the audience, like where in relation to like east, west, south, north?
So the red wolf recovery area is 5 counties in northeastern North Carolina. So it's Beaufort, Washington, Hyde, and Tyrell and Dare County are considered the red wolf recovery zone. to my knowledge, there's only red wolves and deer, a little bit in Hyde and Tyrell. I believe maybe a little bit in Washington too. So it's that tiny little like northeastern part before you get to the Outer Banks. Primarily, they are released and are around the Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge and Pocosin Lakes, which also includes the Pungo unit. Those national wildlife refuges are used by a large variety of people, anyone from bird watchers to photographers like me. Folks hunt out there, fish, kayak. There's a huge mixture of different people that use those places. It is primarily a wetland and kind of pine forest area. Pocosins are, if you don't know what a pocosin is a unique wetland habitat, which is essentially an elevated swamp habitat. So the land actually, when you think of a swamp, you usually think the land has sunk down. There's actually parts of the land that are up above the water. That's called a pocosin.
I bet they're thriving in that. What about like, what's the population like? Is this in the middle of nowhere, rural, like just tight?
Oh, people-wise.
People wise. Like, is it a lot of road systems going through here? I mean,
it's rural North Carolina. There's different like small towns as you go through. It's 64 and 264 are two of the major interstates that go through this area. Primarily the biggest problems with currently with vehicle collisions are on the stretch of road on 264 and 64. Honestly, the 264 and 64 are used a lot, not really by just by the locals, but in relation to people who go to the Outer Banks, the beach. We see a gigantic increase of people who use those roads and are in a very big rush to go to the beach. And so there's a 2-lane highway, so you have people just flying through. And there's been work to try to like educate people about that. There's now bright orange, like kind of flashing signs as you kind of get off the Alligator River Bridge onto the section within red wolf territory that says "Be careful, red wolves." Same on 264.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. And apparently, what I've been told is that those signs also just increase like awareness that they even exist. Like a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, what is that? Like, never heard of a red wolf," and they just Google it. And that has helped, but that definitely needs to be more done. There's studies being done right now to try to determine like any sort of like tall wildlife fencing. There's actually some cool wildlife crossings and some of those tall wildlife fences as you go farther west on 64. There's no current, it's still in the red wolf recovery zone. There's no wolves there right now. Hopefully there will be eventually. But my thought is that hopefully there will be some of those like tall fences kind of erected in these hot zones, because the wolves actually where those crossing points are where those mortalities have happened, including the breeding male of the milltails that we just lost in September. Very bad. They're not actually interested. It's not bisecting their territory. They don't really have territory on the other side. Usually they are lured there by roadkill. So what happened was the breeding male got lured because a black bear got hit and the carcass was not removed in time. It kind of kept getting lured despite people trying to haze them. One of my friends, like, it was a whole thing. Like they kind of just lured to the road. So a couple like reporting roadkill is now a thing out there, especially like bigger animals like deer or bear that could definitely lure the wolves toward the road for an easy meal. Stuff like that. But it is a rural area, but also very highly agricultural. So there's a lot of agriculture out there. Not as much livestock in that area. It's primarily corn, soybeans, huge plots of agriculture out there.
And now I'm sorry about to cut you off, but so there's I think I'd seen just today there's some stuff about a land bridge that you guys you're a part of, or a little bit something that's happening. There's a land bridge that you're trying to get built across this highway to help animals and wildlife cross it. Is that right? Did I see that, or
that might be California? That might be with the cougars in California.
It could have been. I saw something, but
that was P22, the cougar that got hit. They're trying to do. So I guess
that started my mind. Like, why would they not want to look at doing more land bridges? Because there's land bridges. I mean, you see them like if you're traveling through Florida for down here. There's in Florida. I've seen them in different states. Kentucky, I think I've seen some. But it's really cool. It just allows the animals to travel across the highways and roadways to be safe. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. There's a couple of those on Western 64. Unfortunately, the portions I'm talking about that cut right through the wolves territory, the land is so low, you can't build anything, like can't
Makes
raise the
sense.
road to go under or over.
Wow.
So that's why I think fences are going to be pretty much the only good solution for them. Because like I said, the wolves aren't really interested on that other side. There's really nothing for them over there.
That's something I hadn't thought about. Like anytime I've even seen a coyote on the side of the interstate, I'm like, why were you trying to cross the interstate? But that's such a good point. He was probably there for an easy meal, not to cross the dadgum highway. That's such a great point. And then, like you said, bears, like, of course, that's a meal they could feed on for forever. They're going to go down there and try to get it.
That's so cool. Do you know do you know the acreage, just out of curiosity, of that refuge, that management area?
Over 100,000. I can look it up real fast. It's a lot.
That's a substantial amount of land to be able to hold them. So I mean,
18.
their population should, continue to thrive, but
yeah,
I don't know if thrive is the word.
Yeah, not necessarily thrive, but grow. I guess not thrive. I mean, they're just
152,000 acres.
Wow.
So to be fair, some of that isn't perfect red wolf habitat. If you ever go out there, some of that wetland swamp is extremely thick, like very thick. So not the entire refuge is actually like the best habitat for them. So funny enough, the milltails, which like I said are the most historically successful, they're like the one that one family group that hasn't died out. Like they kind of just, one of them has kept on. I'm sorry to keep cutting you off, but there has got to be more than what the number you said. I mean, 152,000 acres. Do they think that there might be some off in the middle of this stuff? I mean, because probably not. There's always the possibility that there's like one left from years ago that's still alive somehow out there. How maybe their tracking collars stopped working. There's technically always a possibility, but at this point, especially since it's been years, there's very not likely too many more extra out there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. And the ones now are really highly monitored. I do know of one, her collar stopped working. So perhaps she is alive. Likely not though, because her mate died. So she's probably not. But there's always a chance that there might be one. People are encouraged to call the program, especially in that recovery area, if they think potentially that there is one. They're always welcome to call and get that investigated, stuff like that. Because kind of community involvement is super important. Yeah. There was actually, I believe at one point there was a wolf that the collar had stopped working. But a local trapper had caught him in one of the traps, and they called him to kind of come get him. And then the same thing happened there's another family group of Pocosin leaks, and the pups, obviously they don't have collars until their first winter. So especially then they look a lot more like coyotes. And this is kind of credence to more like community involvement and kind of people like kind of learning to work together. But the pups I believe at least one of the pups got caught in a trap line by someone, and they didn't even have their collars on, but they still call Fish and Wildlife to go ahead and collar them to make sure that they were wolves and stuff. It was either the pups or one of the adult females. So it's something like that though. But the point of that is that there's still cooperation with local trappers and seeing that this is potentially a red wolf and something to call in instead of something to kind of just like get rid of quietly that they could have done, but they didn't. And that's, I think, a really good beginning to kind of a new age of recovery for these animals that involves people of all different backgrounds working together.
No doubt. Interesting. What question you got? Because I got some more.
I know. I came into this conversation genuinely not knowing a thing, and yet here I am. I'm like, what? Tell me more about this, and this. But one thing that came to mind, you said that it's more of an agricultural area versus like a livestock farm area. Was that intentional so that it wasn't? Okay.
So actually one of the reasons why that area was picked for the recovery area is because by that point, coyotes had started moving east.
Okay.
And that was an area, and in the 70s and 80s, the coyotes hadn't reached that area yet because they knew they were going to have to deal with like hybridization.
Right.
Like, they were trying to avoid it as long as they could. So that area, that very tiny peninsula of North Carolina, was like one of the areas coyotes had not yet gotten. Obviously, they're there now, but that was one of the biggest reasons I picked that area to release the red wolves.
Interesting. Now, question I have, which is the question I know we have all our hunters are wanting to know. So can you please talk to us about the involvement with them and I guess whenever people hear wolf, they think of the gray wolf and they're like, oh my gosh, they're gonna kill all my turkeys, they're gonna kill all my deer. Cause that's the conception I have. Even with coyotes down here, the population is heavy down here in the South. And they are harmful to the fawns and the turkey population and so on. So I guess their involvement with that other ecosystem, like, can you kind of talk about that and just kind of the numbers, if there is any numbers about their involvement with that?
Yeah, so yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So red wolves are our native top canid in the Southeast. Not coyotes, that's the red wolf that was predominantly here. So red wolves, yes, they will eat white-tailed deer. If someone tells you that they won't, that they're lying. They will. They don't eat as many as people think they do. I have actually never seen one. I think I've seen one like raise its head as the deer walked by, but it was like, meh. But red wolves are also, they're smaller than gray wolves. They can sustain themselves on slightly smaller prey. So they will happily eat opossums, raccoons, and that's another thing. I'll kind of go back to this when I talk about the bobwhite quail, where they can actually kind of benefit quail more than they'll hurt them. Kind of the same thing. They will eat quail. I've seen it, but it's not a huge portion of their diet, and they're much more rarely going to eat animals like raccoons and opossums that are notoriously nest raiders for ground birds like turkeys, quail. So that study is still going on, but that's what kind of we're postulating and looking at for how red wolves could affect the ground nesters. I have really not ever heard much of red wolves being super duper interested in turkeys. I think it's because they do they're more family and pack oriented than coyotes. A turkey is just not something that's really up on their plate. They'll usually kind of go for rabbits. They will eat turkeys, but the areas where red wolves live have healthy populations of turkeys, healthy populations of deer. Obviously, there's not many wolves right now.
Right.
What I always talk about is in the years when wolves were at their highest peak, when I was talking about 2011, 2012, when there were several, like at least over like 100 or so wolves running around. If you look at the harvest success rates of whitetail in those same areas, you saw not only no negative changes, it was either about the same success rate or even like slightly higher in those years. So there's really no effect on whitetail hunting when the wolves were even at their peak population. Yeah, so primarily wolves will go for the kind of smaller, sicker, injured. That doesn't mean that they won't occasionally kill a healthy animal. I think it's important to realize like not all the time are they going to get like the most like seconds from death animal. Sometimes they'll get a healthy one, but it's to their benefit to try to get the ones that are not at peak performance, because one kick from a hoof, they can die, they can be severely injured. It's very dangerous hunting deer. So yeah, they'll definitely, I'm sure they'll have an impact, as in they'll eat deer and turkey, but nobody predicts that they're going to have like a horrific
decline in population of it.
Yeah, because of the presence. And also it's important to keep in mind, red wolves will also push out coyotes when given the chance. So like when I was talking about the breeding male that got hit by a car, it was sad but fascinating to watch. So he did not tolerate coyotes. There was one coyote he randomly was fine with. I don't know. We don't know why. Otherwise, he chased him out. He actually, the breeding female who would be his mate, she had a coyote suitor that followed her around before they released him into the wild. And he chased him off like more than a week or two. Like he was gone. After that, he kept that territory like almost pristinely coyote free. And I'm sure the others helped, but he just had like some of them that higher tolerant or lower, like he did not tolerate coyotes. But it was really fascinating, whatever you would like, but a testament to how red wolves and coyotes interact. When he died, I started within a month, I would see multiple coyotes within the territory. Like there was a morning where I only saw coyotes and no wolves. And that's why kind of keeping those breeding pairs intact is actually to everybody's benefit. Because when those breeding pairs kind of break up, the family kind of breaks out, you see things like that, or the coyotes will start kind of moving back in. Then, of course, you might see an increase of hybridization if there's no management actions, but it's to the benefit of everyone to try to keep those red wolf pairs together, to keep them alive. They will push the coyotes out. So that's another thing. If you're super worried because of coyotes kind of killing, I don't know, turkeys, rabbits, deer, what have you, red wolves are going to help with that simply because they will slowly push the coyotes out.
That is crazy. One male was able to do that too. So it's
I bet he definitely got help, but like he was the one, like his mate, she didn't really care as much. Like he very heavily like patrolled his territory. Like I he's up there.
Church on top of the
Dang
kitchen
cats are
counter.
running everywhere.
Church, I think it was Church who made it up there. Is it?
That's hilarious. So like the ones who are just listening to audio only, that she's got 2 different black cats that are running back and forth, been playing this whole time. But
so cute.
But like in my opinion, the kind of size spectrum of them is like so a red wolf is just a little bit bigger, like pound wise compared to a coyote. How much more, like 20 pounds heavier, you know?
It can vary because eastern coyotes can vary so much in weight.
For sure.
But red wolves are typically no more than about 80 pounds or so. There are some that are bigger. But I would say, like, I say they're German Shepherd size, like big German Shepherd size.
And then like a coyote is like 40, 30, young ones 30 to 40, up to 60 pounds. 40. Yeah. I've
never heard of one more than, like, I bet there probably are. I've never heard of one in Eastern North Carolina or North Carolina more than 40, 45. Not to say that they're not.
So that in itself
weigh a little bit less than people think they do.
And that in itself should tell the audience that, you know, there is without a doubt a difference in a coyote and a red wolf. You know what I mean? Like there are 2 different total size, you know, they're 2 different total.
Yeah. And also kind of like we were saying earlier, how people think, oh wow, that's a wolf in like in my camera in like South Carolina or Georgia, when it's not. When you see the red wolves in person, and even if it's like, I don't know, if it's at a zoo where they have them at, or in the wild, like for me, like the difference is so astoundingly obvious. Like even if you take out the collars, this is a wolf. Like they're proportionally, their legs are so much larger, their heads typically are wider. They kind of have that more like kind of built look of a wolf more than a coyote. You'll hear it in their howls too. It's kind of been said that red wolves are like the tenor of the kind of the middle sound for between coyotes and gray wolves. Coyotes obviously have that high pitched yip 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 sound, sounds like a little siren. And then gray wolves are much like that low ooh sound that you associate with wolves. Red wolves are a bit in the middle. So the younger ones kind of sound, the younger pups often sound more like coyotes, but that's how even gray wolf babies, they're yipping and yapping and trying. The size difference between the 2 of them standing together is very obvious. At one point before she got run off, there was a coyote that would sometimes hang around with the wolves. One in particular, one of the wolves she really had a fancy to. She's not in that territory anymore. But when you would see them together, just standing there, people would ask me that, you know, like, oh, is that like the mom and the baby? I'm like, no. But yeah, they're totally different animals. And yes, they're similar, of course. They're not like the size difference between a coyote, like a Western coyote, which is smaller, and a gray wolf, which is bigger than a red wolf, is astoundingly different. Obviously, the size difference between red wolves and Eastern coyotes is a bit smaller, but it's still there. Red wolves can also more likely help with the nutria problem and hogs better than coyotes due to their size and due to their slightly different hunting strategies. That's not been like completely proven yet, because there hasn't been areas where there's red wolves and like hogs together. But coyotes really can't do much with hogs unless they're getting the babies, which good luck getting them out from the mom.
They could have a ball down here. I'm gonna tell you, we got hogs galore. They could.
I don't have them yet. I'm so happy.
I was say
they're terrible.
Yeah.
I'm lucky I don't have them. But yeah, so red wolves are thought to much more likely to be able to help with hogs and invasive nutria. Well, red wolves are bigger. They work together much more hunting wise than coyotes do. So that's also a consideration for future, as there's more red wolf populations established in different areas where they may kind of cross heads with hogs. They could actually help benefit that, which in its own could help benefit an entire ecosystem.
Aspen, did you say that the last pups were born in 2022? Or when were they born?
Sorry, there were some born last year. So the ones born in 2022 were very special because they were the first ones born in the wild since 2018 or 2019. So it had been, I think, 2018, several years where there had not been pups born in the wild. So the Milltails, the same family I keep talking about.
That was the first.
They were the ones and that gave birth. They gave birth to 6 in 2022, 30 males, 3 females. One of the females got hit by a car on 264, but the other 5, they're out there right now. They are now reaching sexual maturity. Hopefully, we hear that maybe 1 or 2 of them at least have kind of moved on and bred. And not always do they immediately go out to and disperse to their own territories that first year that they can, but sometimes I do. I know at least a couple of them have kind of started kind of drifting out though. But and then this 2023, they gave birth to 5. And then they cross-fostered in a male pup, which the foster unfortunately hasn't been seen in a couple months. And one of the daughters got hit by a car again on 264 pretty soon after her dad got hit by a car.
Oh my goodness.
So
what's the average size of a pack? Is it 4 or 5?
So Red Wolf family groups packs consist of a breeding male or breeding female, mom, dad, whatever you want. They are the only pair that breeds in a pack. They are the core of that family unit. And then they will have a couple yearlings, maybe a couple 2-year-olds from previous years. Usually the yearlings will stay with them. So it's a matter of how many of those yearlings survived. Let's just say maybe 4 survived. Sometimes a couple 2-year-olds will stick around. But that's often when at that point they're kind of starting to not stick around as much. And then that year's pups. So it honestly, the size of a Red Wolf pack honestly depends mostly what time of year it is. So breeding season, they might be at its smallest because the 2-year-olds might be looking off on their own. The pups I'm kind of getting older. There's not that extra litter. Then fall is usually the time when they are the biggest. As the dispersers haven't quite left yet, the pups are now running around everywhere. And then you still have the breeding. So the breeding pair. So anywhere from if it's just the breeding pair for some reason, anywhere from 2 to 8, kind of just depending on the success of on how many pups survive to adulthood. It is important and interesting to note that the pups in the recovery area have a bit of a slight edge. So usually wolf pups in the wild, gray wolves, the mortality rate for pups is quite high. So typically 30 to 40% reach their first year. 30 to 50%, I think, is the average across wolf species. The red wolves have a slight edge. So in the first couple weeks, they locate the den and they'll go in, they'll give them vaccines, they'll kind of tag them. They'll give them vaccines for stuff like rabies, distemper, stuff that can wipe out a wolf pack instantly. And I think they deworm them too. They kind of give them a little higher edge. So that definitely does help and their survival rate. They make sure that they don't starve and stuff like that. But without that kind of intervention, wolf pups their survival rate is not fantastic. So especially people think about out west, if you have I don't know, 9 pups born to a litter, maybe, then most of them probably aren't even going to make it through their first year.
Yeah,
wow,
that's interesting. They vaccinate them all, the rabies and stuff. So that would be a question for people who might be listening. Oh well, they might spread rabies. It's more wolves. Just that kind of solidifies that. So that's interesting. Gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So I believe even the coyotes that they sterilize and release back I might not be totally correct on that. I believe they might vaccinate them. Might as well. But no, the red wolves are vaccinated against stuff like that because they don't y'all probably know, distemper or parvo can just wipe out a pack like that.
Absolutely. Well, you guide to view wildlife as well, and I was expecting there were to be at least 100, especially with all the videos I've seen of you. But now to know that you're capturing them out there on video. And there's 18 roughly of them. I'm holy freaking cow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So tell us about that side of your life.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, no, I've done photography for a couple of years and I started guiding last fall. Hopefully whenever this permit gets through, I'll start again this year. But it's really cool. It's really special. I guide in the territory where the Milltail family lives, the Milltail pack of wolves, which number right now, let me do math. The breeding female. So they released a new male, and after the other one got killed, they released him this fall. We're still crossing our fingers that they made it this year. She should, if she is pregnant, she should be giving birth anytime within this month. But then that she had 5 2-year-olds that survived. They're kind of starting to disperse and kind of do other things. So they're not consistently in that territory. And then she has 4 pups that were born in 2023. So those are the wolves that are hanging out around that in that territory. A lot of their territory is closed to people, which is to the benefit of them. We don't want the red wolves to get habituated to people, even if we love them very much. Habituated wolves are the most danger to themselves, not to people. Red wolves have never attacked a person, never bit someone in the entire recovery program history. However, what we don't want is because the wolves will not always stay on that refuge forever. They may disperse on an area that crisscrosses on a private lands, private farms, and we don't want a wolf to be too used to people as they disperse on. That could be not a great situation for them. Because they think that everybody is delighted to see them. Not everybody is. The safest thing for a wolf is to be afraid of people. But wildlife guiding wise, typically what I'll do is we either hike or we drive around, look for the animals. I love educating people, so I'm basically getting paid to talk about and look for animals the whole day, which is pretty great. So I kind of do like I said, the spiel that I did here. I'll talk about the program history, the wolves, their biology, how like their recovery numbers, stuff like that, what you can do. And then hopefully we can see them. There's a huge abundance of other wildlife on the refuge. Eastern North Carolina has the highest density of black bears in North Carolina, or not North Carolina, North America. So many bears. I think my record is like 30 in one day, and I try not to. So many bears. There's animals like coyotes. There's bobcats. I love bobcats. They're like my little arch nemesis. I see bobcats fairly often, but it's usually just like skittering across the road, and that's it. Bobcats, opossums, raccoons, barred owls. There's eagles. In the wintertime, we have a huge amount of waterfowl, migratory waterfowls like tundra swans, snow geese, ducks galore. It's a hugely diverse ecosystem. There's really cool. There are alligators there. There's cottonmouths. We have timber rattlesnakes there. They're also called cane brakes. Yep. Those are really cool actually because timber rattlesnakes are what are called indicator species. So an indicator species is a species whose presence in an ecosystem typically indicates that that ecosystem is balanced and healthy. And fascinatingly enough, where I most often see these rattlesnakes are within the wolf's territory, or kind of like around it. So it's
That's exciting. That's cool.
Well balanced ecosystem. I see deer in the wolf's territory. I see turkeys. They're out there. They're living alongside them. I see the most bobwhite quail around where the wolves live. It's really cool too. It's there's like high levels of agriculture out there. So it's kind of a fascinating blend of like wild and swamp with people. Red wolves are also kind of in that middle of they can't survive in areas like the suburbs or the city like coyotes have adapted to, which is one of the reasons coyotes are so successful. Red wolves can't do that, but they can thrive in agricultural areas. Studies have shown that red wolves are fine. Like the Milltail territory is predominantly in an area either in or around an agricultural land plot within the refuge. And why might they benefit from that? It's because of all the little critters that like agriculture. So rats, nutria, muskrats, possums, raccoons, anything fuzzy like small grab. So they benefit really well in agricultural areas. And so there's so much agriculture out there. You might ask, like, why are people like negatively viewing these animals? They'll be like, why would like a corn or soybean farmer hate wolves if it's free pest control? The answer is a lot of times farmers will rent out their property during deer season. And so they consider the wolves as potentially a threat to that. So that's why it's really important to kind of kind of learned the association between red wolves and whitetail, where red wolves will eat whitetail, but they're not going to decimate them, and that whitetail and red wolves historically lived together perfectly fine. And whitetail hunting has not been impacted from what we've seen, and even in the years when red wolves were at their peak a couple of years ago, we didn't see any impact.
Gosh, it's so interesting. I seriously could talk all day about this. I mean, we've been going what, an hour on this already, and we just
Oh my gosh.
I guess
I guess there's so much to talk about.
No, but when she says, like, from a hunter's perspective, when she talked earlier about how that the male of the Millspec family had pushed out, not entirely himself, but that they had really pushed those coyotes away, I thought, man, as a whitetail hunter on one of those agricultural farms she's talking about, I would much rather have a couple of wolves running around than I would a massive population of
I
coyotes.
agree. I mean, I don't. It's hard to say. I mean, it's a species, and that's why we want
There's
to talk
just a
about
balance
this.
to everything.
There's a
for
balance
sure.
to everything, and the good Lord made it, put it on this earth. So, I mean, there was a purpose at some point. I don't, there's mixed emotions. And I mean,
I think it's just good to hear.
yeah, it's good to
both.
hear the numbers. It's good to hear the stats of what you got. There's no doubt you're knowledgeable in it. And that's just, I'm so excited we had this podcast. It's so cool. I love it.
Yeah, no, I
And
appreciate it.
you've answered all my questions. I'm sitting here trying to think of any more, but I don't think I have any more.
Have any more, let me know. But yeah, no, it's a really cool topic. There's a lot of misunderstanding in it, and I feel like if a lot of people like kind of take a break and talk about it, and also a lot of times like people don't want to talk about it with people that they might not necessarily either agree with or like just hang out around. And that's why I feel like a lot of times like wildlife advocates kind of bump heads a lot like with hunters, because we just don't open these conversations up. And you're not going to be able to talk about it or reach a better conclusion if you're not even willing to talk about it. And that's why I think having like the background of when I first started working around coyotes, like I learned a lot from hunters, and it was kind of just like trying to be open-minded. We don't have to agree on everything. We're not going to agree on everything, but if you kind of approach it from an inflammatory way, then nothing's going to happen.
You're exactly right. I mean, that's with any and everything in life. I mean,
anything you don't understand.
Yeah, you don't understand. And people, who, if you don't know about it, their knowledge isn't in your mind. You feel intimidated, I think, to an extent. So you're like, you just want to shut it out. I don't, it's bad. Or you have a lot of times on this type of situation, you have a bad taste in your mouth because of a certain conversation or certain thing that happened in the past. And it might be true, it might not. I mean, and again, whether red wolves are like terrible in the ecosystem up there in North Carolina, that we can't tell quite yet from what I understand, but over time, once these populations grow, we will be able to tell more. But I mean, it seems like the balance of them, without a doubt, the state is keeping that in check, and the numbers are there. Like you said, the rattlesnake, that you talking about that, and how that, what's the term you said? The indigenous
indicators.
Indicator species. That is very interesting to me. And how that population and the ecosystem is very healthy. I love it. It's some cool stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool. And that's why I tell people who if you don't like coyotes, you might as well let the wolves in, because they'll push them out, and they'll likely red wolves need a larger territory than coyotes do. So there's going to be fewer of those animals over a larger amount of space as well.
Oh gosh.
Good deal.
I really hope that your permit comes in so you can go this fall.
And get some good photography.
And take people out, because I think what you're doing is great.
Yeah.
And I cannot thank you enough for taking time today to educate us. For sure.
Yeah, us South Alabamians, we have no clue over this, and so it was really cool to hear it. So
the more you know, though. I mean, that is so great.
And it's just always be open to learning. That's what we are with this, and I learned a lot today. I really greatly appreciate it, Aspen. And again, we're gonna sign off. And y'all got any questions about this stuff? Y'all just drop it in the comments. We'll answer as best we can.
We'll get Aspen the answer.
Get Aspen the answer, because I won't be able to answer. But we greatly appreciate y'all listening into this podcast, and hope it was educational for you. And we learned some stuff. Hope y'all did too. So we greatly appreciate it. Signing out. Appreciate it, y'all.